Sure thing.
Happy Friday and welcome to another episode of Engagement That Scales with Rachel Hoppy. Hi, Rachel.
Hey, Shannon, how are you?
I'm good. It's Friday, like always.
Yay, it's Friday of Community Management Report. Christian, how are you? It's Friday.
It's Friday. I've got my Friday look going on. Let the growth go a little bit, and enjoying the return of warmer weather in Boston, even though it's a little muggy. That's okay. Yeah. We'll take it.
So I'm enthusiastic to have you on Engagement That Scales this week because you're one of the people that I rely on to understand community and business management. There's far and few between people out there that really can understand that whole integration.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we have research coming out that I think you'll be very interested in. But before we get to that, I want to catch up. What have you been up to?
Yeah.
What's going on in your life? How is that project going that we've been discussing? And what are you thinking about these days?
So, thankfully from a health and safety perspective, all are well in my immediate network. It's been quite the spring for everybody, I think. For us at where I work at Global Genes, which is a global rare disease advocacy organization. We're kind of an umbrella organization. We represent over 630 rare disease foundations, and kind of provide a platform for them to work with over 100 pharma industry companies, mostly on the R&D side. And kind of foster a lot of patient collaboration. We've been really kind of in that maelstrom of how we've been directly impacted. First, as a nonprofit. The nonprofit sector represents a very large sector of the economy, and it's been hit pretty hard. It was prioritized by stimulus checks, but it has been a place where bootstrapping, which is where all nonprofits really start, a lot of us have been pushed back to those days very quickly. Because in a situation like ours, it's very driven by donations, grants, et cetera. Grants have long pipelines to them, like sales cycles to them. You have to get into a really aggressive cash management mode, and to satisfy the stimulus checks and everything, you have to hold on to your staff too, and you have to kind of manage a lot from a business perspective. As an umbrella organization, we are a community. We're essentially a community of communities. So I think the maturity model work you've done over the years has been instrumental for how I've kind of, when I joined this organization, have taken some good practices and some modeling that you might see in the for-profit side, when it comes to customer support, or as you know me from my gaming days, kind of building out collaborative economies directly for profit and for gain. Had to be applied more towards protecting social return on investment and protecting engagement. We've had some really challenging layers because the types of communities we serve with rare diseases are often very much homebound people, kids who are sick, and rely heavily on support from in-home care, which was completely cut off. So the importance of online community, and even if it's, really just community, I won't even talk about online because it's multi-channel, but the importance of community is essential in this environment. So we've had to deploy a lot of data surveillance, a lot of understanding very quickly what people needed immediately, from psychosocial support and connection to understanding, to teaching and training and capacity building. We bucketed most of our activities between two main areas: protecting people's continuity of care and protecting people's continuity of research. Because in my space, in this space, clinical trials represent their care. So cutting off clinical trials, winding down research because researchers need to be safe at home too, was disastrous for a lot of people who run clinical trials as a form of saving their lives. I think when we did that, the good news was we were able to rely on our alliances. We have a corporate alliance, a community, or a foundation alliance, to provide us, input regularly, that we turned around and, managed our regulatory community, their information flows as well. So when you saw kind of CMS coming practically overnight with reimbursement rules around telehealth, that came from our work with a couple of other organizations partnering to just get data fast. You got to get it fast. And in order to do that, you got to have a really engaged community, and everybody rowing in the same direction. I think from a model standpoint, I've relied so heavily on the work you do to think about collaboration as that highest level metric of engagement, or just kind of as a key contributor to value. And also from a business management standpoint, turning that into an annual report or an impact report, because that's where a lot of our fundraising is going to come from.
It's interesting to me because of some of the data we did this year around kind of that shared value, really hit home to me in a different way around how critical collaboration is. Because if you can share value, if you can share the value you're creating with each other, you can get geometric returns for that. And most of our organizations are set up to divide that content and put it in boxes. And so we can't extend the value of it because we can't figure out how to share things at a fundamental level.
Yeah, that's so true. So, I was going to say from an internal perspective too, going remote. So we're relatively distributed already as a workforce in our organization, but being fully remote and isolated also meant that when we needed to get together for what we would normally do quarterly, like whiteboarding sessions, product road mapping, we needed to ramp up our tools. Also event planning. Like for us, our annual summit is a summit of thousands of rare disease patient advocates. It represents a very large percentage of our annual fundraising. We needed to turn that into a digital event, and we shunned a lot of the existing platforms because we wanted to be even more connected and not have a throwaway platform, because we just can't afford that, right? So we had to start getting really creative with our tools and leave no insight unturned, no conversation unhad or undocumented. And go from, events are very assembly line, like everybody knows what they have to do at a certain sequence to get it done on time and the right way. For us, not only do we have to do that, but then we had to create this communication layer around it because we're in an unknown, right? Like we'd never had to do. Yeah. We had to create these, sorry?
There's a lag, which is odd. What did you end up using?
We ended up not selecting any of the traditional community platforms. We are going to go into social channels, and we are going to do more of a campaign. This was a business decision, more a branding decision, that in the future, what we learned from doing digital campaigns and very low on the data capture friction, like registration process, and maximizing broadcast channels like Facebook, especially now that they have rooms, and turning what might have been, lectures into more like watch parties. We're going to go that route because part of our mission is to also increase access and inclusivity in healthcare for rare diseases. And we want to pay this forward into our future model and not forget about this year. And while we'll have an in-person event, we want to be truly global and keep it, more accessible for everyone. So what we're focusing more on, less so are the platforms per se, but more so on, subtitling real time, closed captioning, and just kind of use this year as, this year a lot of funders are giving you a pass, if you're a nonprofit on your in-person event. They're going to fund you anyway to some extent. And for us, then it becomes about operating margin. Like, let's maximize the dollars that we're going to get, keep it light on the expenses, learn a ton, and take what we can do and make it reproducible next year in a more structured environment. It's a maximum learning year for
how do you capture all that data? and organize it?
So I think that's the ongoing challenge that we're going to go through the summer. I think we're going to iterate a lot. It's increased our need to extend our engagement around webinars, events, et cetera, and do a lot of experimentation in a lower risk period with controlled kind of ends, like smaller groups, and actually rely more on leading indicators like preferences. I think we're going to just absolutely max out what you can do with an email service provider, for instance, and create some preferences, landing pages, work a lot with like drip campaigns and things like that to understand individuals and start kind of getting into their interests, their behaviors, understand their kind of engagement, timing, and use all of that to inform a subsequent decision. Now, all that said, we are looking to roll out some sort of a community platform after the fact to capture longer term engagement. It's essential. We are a membership organization. It's just free to join if you're a foundation. And delivering on a more clear ROI around that for, going forward. It was kind of one of those things where we never felt the urgency because we had such a vibrant, engaged community in person, through calls, webinars, et cetera. We were always kind of Facebook groups, et cetera. But now's the time where if you don't have the in-person, that online community becomes absolutely essential. Now, for us, we had to make the choice. Do we have runway between now and September? And do we have time, the time, the time, treasure, and talent to get it done in time? If not, go light, learn a lot, apply it to what comes next.
What this also suggests to me is it requires a lot of talents. If you can't invest in the infrastructure, you need the creativity and the management kind of in person time. So how are you addressing that?
We are doing a lot of planning in a cross-functional team. Like we realized, I come from online communities, but I can't do this alone, and I've always said nobody's a silver bullet in a company. When you try to do that and rely on a subject matter expert, but then don't integrate them, it's not going to go well, whatever the project is. So I think, there's actually a really good article recently released on HBR by Tom Davenport on digital transformation, which really, this is what it ladders up to. That change management, openness and capability, hard skill talent, high EQ and good culture and data centricity, like processes, all of those things have to ladder and have to factor into your processes that are going to get you there. It's kind of an innovation challenge, right? And for us, what we have are some silos here of like events people and program management people, classical nonprofit, right? Who all have their data sets and all have their view into even the same stakeholders. People who attend a program, somebody else in membership services sees them as a person with their own organization and their own challenges. For us, it's right now we're in that process of like putting it all together. What do we know about them? How good is our Salesforce or kind of database or source of truth about our membership? How much do we know about their needs and how do we bucket them? The good news is I think we're in a good place. Now it's about breaking those silos down.
I think what's interesting that we found in our research this year is that even for the advanced external communities who are doing better at this than others, only 50% of them have integrated their community platforms into their CRM. And what was also interesting is if you look at other segments of the community market, they have prioritized member engagement channel integration. But what I'm hearing from you and how I looked at that data is if you haven't integrated it into your business systems, you can't prioritize any other integration. Like, how do you know? And so it gets at this single source of truth, like how is the community impacting and integrating? And so one of our,
I was just saying, I think that points to a greater truth of how central is your community to your business, to your reason for being as a business, to your value prop? How central are you treating them, right? Like for us as an umbrella organization, we have business challenges, right? Like we have to prove our worth to individual funders who could just go fund an individual foundation. We have to prove our worth as a capacity builder, as a connector, as a community host, as a convener, right? And that story is told in data. So if you don't treat that with utmost sanctity, then you're not really going to be able to prove your worth to your funders. You won't be in business, or you won't be able to grow into what you could be. And I think there are so many enterprises now that don't even realize that that's core to their value prop in that sense.
Yeah, well, so my perspective, I mean, I'm biased, right? So I run the community roundtable. But if I look at any organization, I look at them and fundamentally say they're a community. And whether or not they view that as such, and whether or not they value what every member of the community produces is in question, meaning that is not necessarily captured in the business model. But if, and again, this is back to where I've been driving our research, if you can start capturing the investment and the return that all your stakeholders are getting, you see that the collective value of empowering those stakeholders is enormous. But, this is a conversation I've been having, is I don't think we're gonna fully get there from an organizational maturity perspective until our accounting groups understand the financial dynamics. Meaning, until we can translate community dynamics into financial value, there will be a gap in understanding and seeing. So like the general point I usually make is that people aren't on the asset side of balance sheets. And so even though you can go to a consulting organization and that managing directors of the consulting organization will be like, yes, it's absolutely about our people. But until you can see the hard value of that, you are going to lay off your senior people because they cost more.
I think it's funny you say that. Like, of all industries that will say that, that'll be people-centric, and HR messaging will be all over their marketing. It's management consulting companies. And management consulting companies, ironically, the big ones especially, were notorious. Maybe they're better today, but we're notoriously high churn, high burnout. I'm going to go burn myself out for 2 years before I go to business school or law school type consultant.
Yep.
And that why? Because the key metric that they're managing to is revenue per head.
Yep.
And profitability per head. And I think that's everywhere. Like, it's so rampant in the for-profit side, especially, but we still look at it at nonprofits too, from a productivity metric.
Well, and you change, so what's happening kind of more broadly is organizations are no longer, the people in organizations aren't production widgets anymore. Or some of them still are, like if you're on the manufacturing line, whatever. But so much more of that value of the individual is captured in what they know and their experience and their ability to triage problems and see opportunity. So it's knowledge. So we're moving from production to knowledge. And if we can't capture and knowledge grows, whereas production kind of remains constant. And if you don't see that on your balance sheet, you're really not able to make good decisions about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. I've found success in my career when I connected time and time value to revenue metrics. When it came to human capital, to talent, and also to community, because that's where you get substantial, significant step function improvements in return, is when you look at the time it takes to solve a problem, the time it takes to open up a new revenue stream, and I can give it a very clear example of my days back in gaming, when my team identified through customer support tickets that people were struggling. This is back in the day, just so people know, I was in mobile gaming back in like 06, 07, before the iPhone, before, these were WAP browser games, bless you. These were WAP browser games, the old browser, right? So you had to do a lot of clicks and you had to do a lot of waiting in between stuff sometimes. This is more like Dungeons and Dragons type gameplay versus, live action shoot 'em ups today. Like, it's a far cry from Fortnite. One of the things that unlocked revenue, I think it was something like we increased revenue in this one key moment of a transaction that had like 3 extra steps in it that were unnecessary, because people had already opted into mobile payments and like we'd opted them in all over the place. And that was community fed. That was customer feedback fed. That was in our forums. And somebody was actually kind of shortcutting their own browser because they wanted to win their battles or whatever, to skip those 2 steps, to load up and like those were just things like if you're paying attention and you've got a place where people can share and upvote each other's comments or whatever, that turned into something like a 66% increase in revenue in that transaction that week, in 1 week. And those are steps, right? Those steps represent time, the time it took to get something done. There are others where, and I think time value, the interesting thing is that it's very well documented in the world of finance and in business, what the time value of something is. But
it's interesting. For me, it's interesting, and this may be more of a B2B complex process thing. But knowledge and the process of accumulating knowledge is bumpy, right? So you can't look at it in micro activities. You have to look at it over the course of a bigger, and I learned this with having a small child, right? You watch their development and they always like regress before they take big steps. And why are they melting down? They were doing so well. And then the next week you're like, oh, they just learned to walk or like whatever it is. But I don't think that changes as we get older. It just smooths out a little bit. It's not quite so obvious that it's bumpy. And so part of what I look at data is we can now, because of the internet, see all these minuscule data points along the process, and we don't match that to time, for example, right? Like, and what are you doing sequentially? And what's the whole thing look like? And that's where I think a lot of people get in trouble with metrics, is that they're looking at one point in time and saying, I just want more of that. But okay, it relates to something else. And so,
you need to zoom out.
And so I feel like our metrics are behind. And unless you're like the people I know, and I'd be interested in your perspective of how you did this, because the organizations that I know that are doing this better have built their own models and built their own data lakes and really understood their customer experience at a broader level than what we typically get out of our applications.
Completely agree. I think everywhere I've worked, we've always built our own. And when we did use some sort of out of the box solution, it left us frustrated enough that we ended up building our own kind of insight engines on top of them anyway, and I think partially it's because time is relative. And I'll put it in this way when it comes to metrics. When we were early on, and when we've been early on in communities, you get some meaningful actions per day or per week, and you're looking for the trend to accelerate that. Once they start to accelerate and condense, your mind has to kind of switch to a different time span, as you were saying, but then you also have to look for what's truly anomalous within that time span, what's different, what's emergent, so you got to function on both axes. And if you're looking for something that's truly outside of that paradigm, you have to take a step back and say, okay, what am I actually looking for? Because this metric may not be the right one. I often have said, like this is cosmic in scale when it comes to humans and science, right? Like what you see in a microscope is what you see, but if what you're looking for is on the other side of the desk, then you're gonna be looking for a while,
Well, and you get to a point, you made an interesting point too, which is one of the things I know about communities is the dynamics change by where they are in their maturity, meaning how robust they are. And early on, you're looking for very different things than you are later on. So if you don't change your metrics, you are going to you're going to abort, that may not be the right word, you're going to arrest your growth or progression into a bigger, richer community because you're not seeing that adaptation that's necessary on the structural side.
Yeah. And I think, our job is to be able to translate out into why for product teams, for finance, for marketing as well, in ways that are, it's hard. We are so drawn to the qualitative in our field. And if we don't have the quant, then we don't set up that qualitative for maximum, that qualitative insight for maximum delivery, right? So that's why those metrics are so important to have clean. And sometimes you have to set context like, well, that metric that I've been telling you about for a year is good. We're doing okay, but here's where I'm concerned, and here's why. I
think you just made the case for a liberal arts education.
That might be my bias as well. Unintentional. Unintentional, but it's economics. So it's economics with a certain data set and a certain kind of understanding of value propositions and understanding that people seek value.
Well,
So
I would say it's not just economics. That ability to understand that there's white space that you're not seeing is not economics. That's art. That's literature.
No, it's true. And if you're not one who feels particularly artistically inclined, I say everybody has the ability to pick up the phone and ask why. If like somebody is representative of a certain segment, never forget the basics of marketing of like, if you even haven't even done a persona project, but you can intuit your way to saying somebody that like that person's typical. I should spend 90 minutes one day with them. Don't spend 30 minutes, spend 90, because you're gonna get at some point, but you gotta invest that time. And you'll probably learn more than you wanted, but you'll also be able to tell a better story from it.
Well, it's been great to catch up. We're almost at the top of the hour. Yeah. One thing I do at the end of these calls is just have both of us like talk about like one thing that's captured your imagination or your mental load recently. I'm not going to belabor it, but I've been watching Minneapolis all week and some of that stuff, and it's just from a community perspective, it's just I'm struggling with it. I don't know that I have anything to say other than that, but that's what's been on my mind lately. What about you?
It's completely agree. It's been on my mind. I've been watching similar things from some Native American rights movements in Chile, which is the gem of South America. So economically, is going through massive social unrest and have been dealing with their own police brutality issues as well. And it really brought it home this week with Minneapolis. I'm ashamed to kind of feel like I've been also part of the problem by developing a tolerance for it or developing this sense as a white person of privilege that it's not my problem on a day-to-day basis and it doesn't sink in sometimes. But I do think from a community standpoint, these moments, these like community kind of shakeups, and I don't just mean this community of Minneapolis, but the community of Americans, we have the ability to kind of come together and collaborate directly across lines and demand more and demand change beyond social media and beyond sitting there in shock and awe and empathy and sympathy. And if we don't, then we are not collaborative. So we're limited now. So.
That's one of the things I did this morning is just reach out to a lot of my Black friends. I don't have anything to say to them, but just say, hey, I'm thinking of you. And it actually ended up making me feel much better. I don't know that I actually did something, but just making people aware that you're there and thinking of them. But it also, to me, takes a lot of the work that we're doing in community and says, how can we take what we've learned in community and apply that to governance structures? And I think you're a poli-sci background too. Yeah. And like, that's my background. And so to me, the lines are pretty clear between what we're learning about online communities and data and how we can apply that more broadly to solve some of these big issues. It's complicated. There's a lot of work to do, no question. It's not that linear, but
I'll take it even one step further in terms of community offerings. I know we're up against time. A big part of communities are these communities of practice, right? Mm-hmm. Like we do training, we do certification. This is a huge part of this is about police training. Yep. And part of training in any field is about what's the desired outcome. Mm-hmm. And what outcomes are you measuring? And are they inclusive? Do they truly represent the best outcomes for a system, right? For in which many communities might operate. And this one is a fundamental one. Like to me, it's like one of the things we have to focus on as Americans is we want different training of the people who are governing and policing our system, because they don't necessarily align to the outcomes we desire.
I mean, for me, I look at it as like, if I were creating a goal for the police, it would be to create safe communities.
Yeah,
that's my goal. It's clear a lot of people don't feel safe, and so that is problematic, and should be driving change across the board.
And flip side for the lady in Manhattan who showed what she's really about. I think the training doesn't just stop with cops. We've got a lot of training to do across the board to be more inclusive as communities, to define those outcomes for communities more inclusively. So.
And define the behavior. I mean, it's good community guidelines, right? Like, this is how you behave in this situation. Tell people. Because some people clearly need that instruction, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah.
That's a great place to end. Christian, I know you're very busy trying to figure out online implications for global genes, but thank you for spending a few minutes with me on a Friday. Good luck.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye, guys.